Chapter 1. The Worst Date in Recorded History. The ice in Lily's glass had melted 10 minutes ago, and she was running out of ways to pretend that mattered. So the distributed ledger, Chad said, leaning forward with the confidence of a man who had never once considered that he might be boring, is really the paradigm shift. Lily said. It's not just currency, it's a whole new architecture of trust. I'm actually invested in a token that's going to revolutionize the art market. She took a sip of her watery gin. It was awful. The bar, Nocturne, was the kind of place that thought low lighting and high prices were a substitute for personality. And Chad was the kind of man who thought vocabulary was a substitute for conversation. He hadn't asked her a single question in 40 minutes. Not one. Not her name. He'd already forgotten it, she was fairly certain. Not what she did. Not whether she had opinions on the fundamental restructuring of global finance. He'd simply launched into his keynote the moment she'd sat down and hadn't paused for breath since. This was her penance. This was what she got for letting Chloe set her up. He's a great guy, Lily. You just need to get out there. Getting out there, it turned out, meant being buried alive under jargon. NFTs are just the beginning, Chad continued. I need to use the restroom, Lily said, which was a lie, but she was considering climbing out a window, and reconnaissance seemed wise. The night's young, Chad said, and then pivoted, without any discernible transition, to his CrossFit regimen. She didn't go to the restroom. She sat there, scanning the room for an exit that didn't involve property damage, and her gaze snagged on a man sitting alone at the bar. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't trying to catch the bartender's eye. He was just sitting there, holding a glass of something dark, watching the room with a stillness that was wrong. Not relaxed. Not bored. Still, the way a painting is still. He was wearing a dark suit that fit like it had been made for him, which it almost certainly had, and his dark hair was neat in a way that suggested it had been neat for a very long time. He looked like someone had cut a figure out of a portrait from 1810 and placed him on a bar stool to see if anyone would notice. She noticed. As if he felt it, he turned his head. His eyes met hers. They were dark and steady, and for a split second she had the unnerving sensation of being read, not looked at, but understood completely, like a document someone had been studying for a long time. Chad was talking about his deadlift PR. Lily looked at the stranger, held his gaze, and mouthed 2 words as clearly as she could. Help me. She expected confusion, a polite look away. Instead, a flicker crossed his face, something between amusement and recognition, and he gave a single nod so subtle she almost missed it. He set his glass on the bar. He stood. He started walking toward them. He moved through the crowded room without hurrying and without touching anyone. People shifted out of his path the way water parts around a stone. Unconsciously, as if their bodies had decided before their brains could catch up. The ambient noise seemed to thin around him. Chad was mid-sentence. And the beauty of it is the volatility, if you know how to ride the wave. When the man arrived. He didn't look at Chad, he looked at Lily. Darling, he said, and his voice was low and calm and carried the way a cello carries in a quiet room. I'm so sorry I'm late. The traffic was unconscionable. And then he leaned down and pressed his lips to her cheek. The cold was a shock. Not unpleasant. Startling, like pressing your face against a window in January. The hairs on her arms stood up. He smelled of something clean and very old, like stone churches and winter air. It's fine, she managed, and her voice came out smaller than she wanted. He straightened and turned to Chad. The look he gave Chad was not aggressive. It was worse than aggressive. It was the look of someone cataloging an insect and deciding it wasn't interesting enough to kill. Chad's mouth opened, closed, opened again. Do I know you? No, the man said. One word, complete. The silence that followed was the kind that has its own weather. Chad seemed to physically deflate, his broad shoulders curling inward, his too large watch suddenly looking absurd on his wrist. The man turned back to Lily, and his expression shifted. Just enough. Warmer. Almost gentle. Are you ready to go? Yes, she grabbed her purse. Yes, I am absolutely ready to go. She stood, avoiding Chad's bewildered face. It was nice to meet you. The man placed a hand on the small of her back. The chill of his fingers came through her dress like a cool current. He guided her through the bar and out into the night. On the sidewalk, under a street lamp, he dropped his hand. The warmth rushed back. Thank you, she said, turning to face him. Seriously, you just saved my life. He seemed to be explaining a paradigm shift, the man said, and there was a thread of dry humor in his voice that didn't quite match his face. His face was completely serious. In my experience, those are best survived from a distance. She laughed, a real startled sound. You heard all that? From across the room? I hear a great many things, he paused. Most of them are considerably less tedious than distributed ledger technology. Was he really that loud? He was that earnest, which is worse. He regarded her with that same steady, assessing look. My name is Ambrose. Lily, she offered her hand. He took it. His grip was firm, his skin cool and dry. Not ice cold, not unpleasant, but distinctly, unmistakably colder than any hand she'd ever shaken. Like he'd been standing outside for a long time, except it was September and the night was warm. It's a pleasure, Lily. He held her hand a beat too long, then released it. Can I buy you a drink? She asked. As a thank you for the rescue? There's a place around the corner that's less terrible. Something shifted in his expression. A flicker of what might have been surprise, or might have been pain, replaced almost instantly by that careful composure. I appreciate the offer, but I think, if you'd allow it, I'd prefer to see you properly, not as a rescue, not as a thank you. He met her eyes. Coffee, tomorrow. I'd like to hear you talk about something other than escape routes. She should have said no. He was a stranger, a handsome, unsettlingly perceptive, abnormally cold stranger. But the word that came out of her mouth was, yes. Good, he nodded, a small, old-fashioned gesture that belonged in another century. You have ink on your wrist. The Astor Place branch, if I'm not mistaken. She looked down. A faint blue smudge from the library's date stamp. How did you... I'll leave a message for you there. 10 o'clock, if that's agreeable. He turned and walked away before she could ask how he knew which library, how he'd read the stamp from across a bar, or why his skin was the temperature of a marble countertop. He disappeared into the city the way smoke disappears, there and then not, without any clear moment of departure. Lily stood on the sidewalk for a long time, her cheek tingling with phantom cold. Chapter 2. The Note. The note was waiting at the front desk when she arrived the next morning, a folded piece of heavy cream paper, the kind that doesn't come from a normal stationery store. The handwriting was precise and slightly old-fashioned, the letters formed with the deliberation of someone who had learned to write before ballpoint pens existed. The cafe on 7th, 10 o'clock, A. Margaret, the head librarian, watched Lily read it with undisguised curiosity. A gentleman left that for you at opening. Tall, dark suit, very... She searched for the word. Composed. Thank you, Margaret. He didn't blink the entire time he was at the desk. That's a detail. Just making sure you're informed. The cafe was small and quiet, the kind of place that smelled like old books and fresh espresso. Lily arrived 5 minutes early. Ambrose arrived at exactly 10, not a minute before, not a second after. He was wearing dark trousers and a black sweater that seemed to absorb light, and he filled the doorway for a moment before moving to her table with that same fluid, unhurried grace. Good morning, he said. Hi. How did you know I work at that library? He sat. A waitress appeared. He ordered a black coffee without looking at the menu. Lily asked for a latte. You were carrying a first edition of Bulgakov last night, he said. In your bag. The Astor Place branch has one of the few copies in public circulation. You saw it in my bag? It was zipped. Not entirely. She stared at him. He met her stare with perfect calm. "You're very observant," she said. "I've had a great deal of practice." The waitress returned and placed a small card on the table with a QR code. "For the menu," she said brightly. "Just scan with your phone." Ambrose looked at the card. He picked it up. He turned it over. He held it at arm's length, then brought it close, examining the small square of black and white pixels with the intensity of a man defusing a bomb. "What is this?" he said. It wasn't a question. "It's a QR code," Lily said. "You scan it with your phone camera and it opens the menu." He looked at her, then back at the code. "You are telling me that this pattern, this arrangement, contains information, readable by a device?" "Yes." "And you are comfortable with that?" She bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. "It's very common. Every restaurant has them now." "Every restaurant has elected to encode their offerings in a format that requires a surveillance device to decipher?" "It's not a surveillance device. It's a phone." "Those are the same thing." He set the card down with careful precision and addressed the waitress who had been hovering. "I'll have the coffee, black. If you could simply tell me what pastries are available, verbally, in the traditional fashion, I would be grateful." The waitress blinked. "We have croissants, muffins, and—" "The croissant. Thank you." He did not eat the croissant. It sat on its plate for 2 hours, elegant and untouched, while they talked. Lily noticed. She filed it away. He asked her what the oldest thing she'd ever held was. She told him about the cuneiform tablet, 4,000 years old, a receipt for livestock. "History is mostly receipts," he said, and something in his voice suggested he knew this from more than reading. "Debts, transactions. The grand narrative is a fiction we impose afterward." "And love letters," she said, "and diaries full of secrets no one was meant to read. Those are the only parts worth preserving." He was watching her with a focus that was almost physical, as though she were the only source of light in the room. "What do you love about it, the archive work?" Nobody had ever asked her that, not like that, not with genuine interest, not as though the answer mattered. She told him about the silence of the stacks, the weight of a document that someone held 300 years ago, the way you could reconstruct a whole life from a handful of letters. She talked for 20 minutes. He listened without interrupting once, and his coffee sat untouched in front of him, steaming, then cooling, then cold. "You haven't drunk your coffee," she said finally. He glanced down at it. "I'm not much of a coffee drinker. I just enjoy the smell." "Then why did you order it?" A pause, barely perceptible. "It seemed like the appropriate thing to do." When they left, stepping into bright afternoon sun, he flinched. A tightening around his eyes, a slight turn of his head, as though the light had weight. He guided her into the shade of an awning with a hand that didn't quite touch her back. "The sun is rather aggressive today," he murmured. "It's September." Nevertheless, he looked at her from the shade, his face all angles and shadow. "I'd like to see you again, Lily." "Me too." "Dinner, Friday. I'll come to you at 8. "It's a date." He gave her that small, archaic nod and walked away, staying close to the buildings, moving through patches of shade with a precision that might have been habit or might have been necessity. Lily watched him go. Then she looked at the untouched croissant the waitress was clearing from their table, and the untouched coffee, and the way he'd flinched at the sun, and the way his skin had been cool in September, and she thought, something is very wrong with that man, and I am going to see him on Friday anyway. Chapter 3. The King Who Does Not Eat. The restaurant was Italian, expensive, and lit entirely by candles, which Lily was beginning to suspect was not an aesthetic choice. Ambrose studied the menu with the focus of a man reading a treaty. "The risotto ai funghi porcini," he said to the waiter, articulating each word with the care of someone who had spoken Italian before the language had fully standardized. "And the burrata to start." He did not eat the burrata. He did not eat the risotto. He moved them around his plate with architectural precision, rearranging ingredients into patterns that would have impressed a food stylist. And when the waiter cleared the dishes, both plates looked like art installations. Beautiful, undisturbed, and completely untouched. "You didn't eat," Lily said. "I had a late lunch." "You said that last time." "I have late lunches frequently." "Ambrose." "Yes?" "You ordered a burrata and built a small sculpture out of it." A silence. The muscle at his jaw tightened once and then went still. Not the way a person's jaw tightens, but the way stone settles. The presentation was exceptional. I felt it deserved to be appreciated visually. She let it go. For now. The waiter brought the bill. Ambrose reached into his jacket and produced a leather billfold that looked older than the restaurant. He opened it, and Lily caught a glimpse of what was inside. Not credit cards, but folded notes of a kind she'd never seen. Heavy paper, engraved. Before he could extract one, a voice came from behind them. "I wouldn't, sir." Lily turned. A man was standing at the edge of their table, tall, thin, immaculately dressed in a waistcoat and tie that somehow looked both contemporary and from 1890. He had the angular, composed face of a portrait subject and the expression of someone who had been patient for a very long time and was now being patient on purpose. "Percival," Ambrose said, and there was a note in his voice she hadn't heard before. The faint resignation of a man whose solitude has been interrupted by someone who has a key. "Sir." Percival produced a slim black credit card and handed it to the waiter in one motion, smooth as a card trick. "You've been absent from the court for 3 consecutive evenings. This is, I believe, unprecedented." "I've been occupied." "Evidently." Percival's gaze slid to Lily. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes, something carefully suppressed, flickered. If Lily hadn't been watching closely, she would have missed it. It looked, improbably, like delight. "You must be the reason." "Percival," Ambrose said, a warning. "Merely observing, sir." He turned to Lily and inclined his head with perfect formality. "A pleasure. I am Percival. I manage Ambrose's affairs." "His what?" Lily said. "You started to say something else." Percival looked at Ambrose. Ambrose looked at the table. The candle between them guttered. "His calendar," Percival said smoothly, "which is, at present, alarmingly empty. 3 evenings, sir. Lord Beaumont has called twice. The Ashcombe delegation sent a formal inquiry, and the matter we discussed remains unresolved. It can wait. It has been waiting for 90 years. Then another evening won't matter." Percival's mouth twitched. It was the smallest possible movement, but Lily saw it, and she knew what it was. He was trying not to smile. He was failing. "Of course, sir. I'll inform the court you are indisposed." He inclined his head to Lily again. A genuine pleasure. And then he left, weaving through the restaurant with a precision that matched Ambrose's own. "Who was that?" Lily asked. "My assistant." "Your assistant who manages your calendar and something he almost called you that starts with his?" Ambrose picked up his wine glass, which, she noticed, he had been holding all evening without drinking, and set it down again. "Percival has been with me for a long time. He occasionally forgets which century we're in." "How long is a long time?" "Some time." She let that go too. The pile of things she was letting go was getting tall. They saw each other 4 times in the next 2 weeks, always at night. Always activities that didn't require eating. A late showing at Film Forum, a walk through the park at 11 when the paths were empty and the moonlight turned the reservoir into a sheet of hammered silver, an after-hours gallery showing he'd somehow arranged with a phone call that consisted of him saying his name and a long silence on the other end. On the 3rd date, she brought him to her apartment for the first time. She'd been nervous about it. The place was small, cluttered with books, and the kitchen smelled permanently of coffee. He stood in her doorway and waited. "You can come in," she said, hanging up her coat. "Thank you." He stepped inside, and something about the way he said it, "thank you," had a formality that went beyond politeness. Like the invitation mattered more than she understood. He was examining her bookshelf with the careful attention of a man in a museum when a voice from the kitchen counter said cheerfully, Good evening. I noticed your front door opened. Would you like me to turn on the lights? Ambrose went absolutely still. Not startled still, predator still. The kind of still that comes before a decision about whether something is a threat. His head turned slowly toward the source of the voice. On the counter, beside the coffee maker, sat a small black cylinder with a glowing blue ring. "Who is that?" he said. His voice had dropped half an octave. "That's Alexa. There is a woman in your kitchen." "She's not a woman. She's a voice assistant. She knows when your door opens. She controls your lights." He was looking at the device with an expression of profound concern. "Is she imprisoned?" "She's a speaker, Ambrose. She's a piece of technology. She plays music and sets timers and—" "Alexa," he said, addressing the device directly with the grave courtesy of a man greeting a foreign dignitary. "My name is Ambrose. I intend no harm to the occupant of this residence. May I ask who employs you?" "I'm sorry, I didn't quite get that," Alexa said. "Would you like me to play some music?" She doesn't understand me. She understands keywords, not full. She has been placed here against her will, and she cannot comprehend requests for help. This is deeply concerning. She wasn't placed here against her will. I bought her during a Prime Day sale for $29. $29. He turned to look at Lily. You purchased a sentient being for $29. She's not sentient. She has a name. She responds to her name. She is aware of activity in her environment. By any standard of— "Alexa, play jazz," Lily said. The speaker began playing Coltrane. Ambrose regarded it with the expression of a man whose concerns have not been addressed, but who recognizes he is outnumbered. "I find this troubling," he said. "Noted." She handed him a glass of water he wouldn't drink. "Do you have any technology in the court?" "We have electricity, running water, central heating, which was a contentious addition in 1923. Percival manages a telephone, though he finds it philosophically objectionable." He accepted the water and held it the way he held all beverages, as a source of warmth, not hydration. "We do not have Alexas. I'll unplug her if it makes you uncomfortable." "It would make me less concerned for her welfare, yes." She unplugged Alexa. He visibly relaxed. They sat on her couch, her at one end, him at the other, a careful 6 inches between them that felt like the most charged space in the city. Coltrane played from her phone instead. He sat very still, and she was aware, as she always was, of the absence of movement. No fidgeting, no shifting weight, no breathing unless he was about to speak. Just a man-shaped stillness beside her that radiated cold the way a window radiates winter. "You're staring at my hands," he said. "They don't move. They don't need to. Humans fidget, constantly. You just don't. I've had 7 centuries to stop fidgeting." A pause. It took about 3. She reached out and touched his hand where it rested on his knee. His fingers were cool and still. He didn't pull away, but she felt the effort in his stillness, the controlled restraint of something that was making a very deliberate choice to hold its ground. "Your pulse just increased," he said quietly. "Don't tell me about my pulse." "I won't if you find it. I find it extremely invasive, and also, I don't want you to stop noticing." He looked at her. Something in his expression was unraveling. "You are a very confusing person." "Good. You've had 7 centuries of not being confused. It's my turn." The following Tuesday, she was hauling groceries down the street, 3 bags too heavy, the handles cutting into her fingers, when Ambrose appeared beside her. It was barely dusk, the sky bruised purple, earlier than she'd ever seen him out. "You need help," he said, not a question. "I'm fine." "You're listing to the left. The bag with the potatoes is unbalanced." He took all 3 bags from her, in one hand, 50 pounds of groceries, held with the effort of picking up a newspaper. She stared. His arm wasn't even tense. He caught her staring. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely caught, a flicker of something raw crossing his face before the composure reassembled. "I work out," he said. "Ambrose?" "Quite seriously, there's a gymnasium at the... You just picked up 50 pounds of groceries in one hand and you didn't even shift your weight." A pause, long enough that a normal person would have filled it. "I work out extensively." She laughed. She couldn't help it. The lie was so terrible, so transparently inadequate, that it circled all the way back around to charming. He looked at her with an expression of earnest confusion. He didn't understand why she was laughing, and the fact that he didn't understand made it funnier. He carried the bags up 3 flights of stairs without breathing. Not without breathing hard, without breathing at all. She watched the back of his neck the whole way up and never saw it move. In her kitchen, he set the bags down with careful precision. The room was small. He was very close. The air between them felt weighted. "You're not going to tell me how you did that," she said. "I would prefer to explain at the appropriate time." "And when is the appropriate time?" He looked at her. His dark eyes were serious and sad and full of something she couldn't name. "When you've decided whether you want to keep seeing me." "I've already decided." "You've decided based on incomplete information." "Ambrose." She stepped closer. He went very still. "I'm an archivist. I spend my entire life working with incomplete information and figuring out what the full picture looks like. I'm not an idiot. I know something is different about you. You don't eat, you don't drink, you don't breathe unless you're talking. Your skin is cold. You flinch at sunlight. You can hear conversations across crowded rooms and carry my groceries like they're made of paper." She held his gaze. "I have a theory." The stillness that came over him was absolute. Not human still. Something older. Something that had learned to be still before humanity had invented the word for it. "What is your theory?" he asked, and his voice was very quiet. "I think you should tell me the truth, and then we'll see if I'm right." Chapter 4. You're a vampire. He didn't speak. The silence in her kitchen was the particular kind of silence that has weight, the kind that presses against the walls and makes the refrigerator hum sound deafening. Ambrose stood very still, his hands at his sides, his fingers not moving. She counted the seconds. At 5, a normal person would have shifted their weight. At 10, they would have looked away. At 15, they would have said something, anything to break the tension. He hadn't moved at all. He hadn't blinked. The muscle at his temple tightened once, a ghost of a reflex, and then went still again. "You're a vampire," Lily said. Not a question, a statement. She said it the way she'd say, "This document is from the 14th century," with the calm certainty of someone who has examined the evidence and reached a conclusion. Ambrose's composure cracked. Not dramatically, a hairline fracture, a barely visible shift in the architecture of his face. His eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch. His lips parted. He took a breath. Deliberately, consciously, the way someone picks up a fork they don't need. "You're not supposed to say it like that," he said. "Like what?" "Like you're filing a report." "How am I supposed to say it? With, I don't know, horror? Disbelief?" "The traditional response involves screaming, or asking me to prove it, or..." He stopped. "You're not screaming." "No. You're not asking me to prove it. You just stood in my kitchen without blinking for 20 seconds. Consider it proven." She leaned against the counter and crossed her arms. "How old are you?" He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, there was something in them she hadn't seen before. Relief, raw and unguarded, like a man who had been holding his breath for a very long time. "I was born in 1319, in what is now the English Midlands." She did the math. "You're 706. 707. I had a birthday in March." "Happy birthday." "Thank you." He paused. "No one has said that to me in approximately a century." "Do you need to be invited in?" He blinked. Yes. Yes. You invited me to carry your groceries, That sufficed. So when you asked to come up, I was not being polite. I was being literal. She filed that away. Do you have a reflection? No. Is that why you never check your hair? My hair has not changed in 700 years. Checking it seems redundant. She almost smiled. Almost. Do you drink blood? The relief faded. Something heavier took its place. Not shame exactly, but a careful, centuries-practiced version of honesty that braced for impact. Yes. From people. Yes. Willing. Always willing. There are arrangements. It's not what you're imagining. You don't know what I'm imagining. You're imagining something from a film, something violent. She was. Tell me what it's actually like. He looked at his hands. Long fingers. A single old ring on his left hand. Dark metal. No stone. It's intimate. More intimate than I think is appropriate to describe in detail in your kitchen at 7 in the evening. Fair enough. She paused. The man in the alley, 3 weeks ago, the drunk who came at us. You didn't move. You just looked at him and he ran. Yes. That was a predator thing. Yes, he met her eyes. I am a predator, Lily. That fact doesn't change because I'm standing in your kitchen and your refrigerator magnets are shaped like fruit. They're shaped like vegetables. The eggplant is a vegetable. The eggplant is technically a berry. Are you correcting my refrigerator magnets right now? I'm trying to have an honest conversation about my nature, and you keep asking practical questions. That's because I'm practical. She straightened up from the counter. What else? What haven't you told me? The pause that followed was different from the others. This one had a decision inside it. I am. There is a position. Among my kind. He seemed to be choosing each word with the care of someone assembling a clockwork mechanism. A political role. I didn't seek it. It is, a matter of lineage and survival. I am responsible for the governance of a court, a community, the preservation of our secrecy, the management of our laws, the negotiation of our survival alongside. He stopped. Among my kind, the title is king. Lily looked at him, in her kitchen, with the vegetable magnets and the stacked mail and the window that faced a fire escape. You're a vampire king. I would prefer if you didn't say it with that particular inflection. What inflection? The one that makes it sound like a novelty mug? She bit the inside of her cheek. So you have, what, subjects, a throne, a castle? I have responsibilities, a residence, and an extremely persistent assistant named Percival who has been calling me every 20 minutes since he left the restaurant. As if on cue, a faint buzz came from his jacket pocket. He ignored it. The title is largely administrative. You're a vampire mayor. I am not a... He stopped, reconsidered. The analogy is imprecise, but not entirely. You have meetings. I have councils. Same thing. They are not the... He stopped again. He was looking at her with an expression that was new, not composed, not careful, not the managed centuries of court training register she'd come to recognize. This was something underneath all of that, bewildered, undone. You are taking this remarkably well. I told you, I'm practical. You just learned that the man you've been seeing is a 700-year-old predator who drinks blood and rules a coven, and you're asking about my meeting schedule? I have conditions, she said. He went still again, but this time it was a different kind of stillness. Not predator still, but the stillness of someone who has been offered something they were afraid to want. Conditions, he repeated. If we're going to do this, whatever this is, I need the truth. All of it. No more, I had a late lunch. No more, I work out. If I ask you a question, you answer it. If there's something I need to know, you tell me before I have to figure it out myself. Those are my terms. Those are reasonable. They're non-negotiable. He looked at her for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. The city murmured through the window. His phone buzzed again in his pocket. Percival, undoubtedly, experiencing some fresh crisis of scheduling. "Agreed," he said. And then, very quietly, "I had expected this conversation to go differently. You expected me to scream. I expected you to ask me to leave. I considered it, for about 3 seconds. Then I decided I wanted answers more than I wanted you gone." She stepped forward. He didn't step back, but she felt the effort in his stillness, the controlled restraint of something very old and very dangerous choosing to hold its ground. She reached out and touched his hand. His skin was cool and smooth, like river stone, and she felt his fingers tighten around hers with a pressure that was carefully, precisely calibrated not to hurt. "Your hand is cold," she said. "It's always cold. Body temperature is approximately 15 degrees Celsius. It doesn't change." 15 degrees, that's a wine cellar. "I've been compared to worse." She looked at their hands, hers warm and brown and alive, his pale and still and cold. The contrast was visible. She didn't let go. "Come to dinner on Saturday," she said. "I'll cook. You don't have to eat. You can build a sculpture out of whatever I make. Percival can come too, if he promises not to almost call you His Majesty in front of the neighbors." Something happened to his face. The composure didn't crack. It dissolved. Underneath was something raw and startled, and so full of an emotion she could only call hope that it made her chest hurt to look at. "Saturday," he said. "Yes, I would, yes." Saturday arrived. She cooked pasta, simple, aglio e olio, the kind of thing you can make while having a conversation. Ambrose sat at her kitchen table and did not eat, and did not pretend to eat, which was, she realized, its own kind of honesty. Percival came. He brought wine, a bottle old enough to make Lily's archivist instincts twitch. He sat very upright in her small kitchen chair and ate the pasta with the precise, appreciative delicacy of someone who had learned to eat human food as a social skill and had perfected it over 400 years. "This is excellent," Percival said. "Thank you." "The king does not eat, as you've observed, but I maintain the skill for diplomatic purposes." He took another forkful. "And because I enjoy it. Don't tell the court." "Percival," Ambrose began. "He hasn't eaten in public in approximately 90 years, Percival continued, ignoring him with the ease of long practice. "The last time was in 1934, at a state dinner with the Vienna Coven, and he was forced to consume an entire Sachertorte. He spoke of it for decades." "It was an abomination," Ambrose said darkly. "It was chocolate cake." "It was a violation of my person," Lily laughed. Ambrose looked at her with that expression of earnest bewilderment, the one that meant he hadn't said anything funny and didn't understand why she was laughing, which was, of course, exactly why she was laughing. Later, after Percival had left, with 2 plates of pasta wrapped in foil for diplomatic purposes, Ambrose stood at her kitchen window, looking out at the city. The streetlights caught the planes of his face, all angles and shadow, and his stillness against the moving lights outside made him look like a fixed point in a turning world. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "You have never not asked me something." "The blood, how does it work, logistically?" He didn't turn from the window. "There are willing donors within the community, arrangements. There's no hunting, no violence. It's organized." "But what does it feel like, for you?" Now he turned. His expression was careful, honest, and slightly uncomfortable. "It's intimate. More intimate than I can easily describe. When you feed from someone, you feel them. Not their thoughts, their state, their emotional reality, for a moment." He paused. "It's why feeding from someone you care about is different. It's not just sustenance. It's a kind of knowing." "Have you ever—" She stopped. "Fed from someone I loved?" His voice was very quiet. "Once, a long time ago." She didn't ask who. She already knew. "Will you ever need to feed from me?" "No, never without your choice. It would never be something He stopped, recalibrated, with visible effort. It is not something that will happen unless you choose it, and you do not need to choose it. There is no expectation. I'm not afraid of it. You should be, a little. I'm not afraid of you, Ambrose. He looked at her with those dark, ancient eyes, and the muscle at his jaw tightened, the ghost memory reflex, the body remembering a feeling the heart could no longer pump. That, he said, is the most terrifying thing anyone has said to me in 700 years. Chapter 5. The Portrait. 3 weeks later, Ambrose brought her to his home. It was not what she expected. She had been imagining a castle, or at least a penthouse with Gothic pretensions. Instead, it was a townhouse in the village, old, beautiful, and filled with the kind of objects that made her archivist's heart stutter. First editions in glass cases, a Turkish rug she was fairly certain belonged in a museum, a clock on the mantelpiece that had stopped at some point in the 18th century and never been restarted. "This is your house," she said, standing in the entrance hall. "One of them. How many do you have?" "Several." "That's not a number." "It's a deliberately vague answer designed to avoid a conversation about real estate that I sense you will find objectionable." She was looking at the books. She couldn't help it. "Is that a first folio?" "It was a gift, from a playwright I knew slightly." "You knew Shakespeare slightly?" He was difficult at parties. Percival appeared from a side room carrying a tray with a single teacup. He set it on the table near Lily with the smoothness of centuries of practice, and inclined his head. "Miss Lily, how delightful." He was not even pretending not to be pleased. His composure was a thin membrane stretched over what Lily could only describe as profound and sustained enjoyment. "May I say, the king has been in an excellent temper these past weeks. The court has noticed. There is speculation." "Percival," Ambrose said, "Lord Beaumont believes he's taken up a hobby. The Ashcombe delegation thinks he's plotting something. I have, of course, said nothing." His eyes were bright. "But I have enjoyed the speculation enormously." "Percival." "Shall I arrange dinner, sir? Miss Lily mentioned she was hungry, and I have taken the liberty of locating what is it called?" He produced a phone, clearly not his own, held with the distaste of someone handling a suspicious object. "A delivery application. It sends a stranger to your door with food. I find the concept alarming, but apparently it is commonplace." "I'll order," Lily said, taking the phone. She pulled up DoorDash on her own phone and placed an order from a Thai place she liked. When the notification pinged 20 minutes later, Ambrose accompanied her to the door. The delivery driver was a college kid in a bike helmet. He handed Lily the bag, she thanked him, and he left. Ambrose watched the entire transaction from 2 feet back, his expression one of deep and genuine concern. "You invited a stranger to your residence," he said after the door closed. "I ordered food." "Through a device, without verifying his identity, he now knows where you live. He's a DoorDash driver, Ambrose. That is not a name that inspires confidence." "It's not his name, it's the—" She stopped. "Are you genuinely worried about the delivery driver?" "I am genuinely worried about a system in which strangers are directed to private homes by an application, and the only authentication is a name that sounds like an assault." He paused. Also, he was nervous. His heart rate was elevated. He was probably late for another delivery. Or he was conducting reconnaissance. For what? The Thai food syndicate? Percival, from the other room, made a sound that might have been a cough and was definitely a laugh. They ate. She ate, he watched, in a sitting room lined with paintings. Old paintings. Portraits in heavy frames, landscapes that looked like they'd been acquired from the artists directly. She was comfortable here, among old things. It was her world in a way. The preserved past, the weight of objects that had outlived their owners. She got up to look more closely at a landscape near the fireplace, carrying her pad thai. Ambrose was telling her about the clock on the mantelpiece. It had belonged to a friend, he said, a clockmaker who had died in 1782, and he'd never had the heart to restart it. When she turned the corner into a small alcove and stopped. The fainting was not large. perhaps 2 feet by 3, in a gilt frame darkened with age. It was a woman seated, in clothing that Lily placed immediately as early 17th century. The structured bodice, the lace collar, the heavy fabric. The technique was Dutch, she thought, fine, intimate, the kind of portrait commissioned by someone who loved the subject. The woman's face was her face, not similar, not reminiscent. Hers, the same strong brow, the same wide-set eyes, dark and direct. The same mouth, the slight asymmetry of the upper lip, the fullness of the lower one. The same angle of the jaw, even the way the hair fell, dark and heavy, framing the face. Lily's pad thai container tilted in her hand. She didn't notice. Ambrose. He was still talking, something about the clockmaker, about the specific sound the mechanism made before it stopped. She heard his voice trail off. She heard the silence that followed, the particular silence of a vampire who has realized something has gone wrong. Ambrose, who is this? He appeared in the alcove. She watched his face as he saw what she was looking at, and she watched the composure, the real one, the one that held for 700 years, shatter. Lily. Who is she? Her name was Marguerite. When? 1631. And she looked. Yes. The word hung there, one syllable, an admission of everything. Lily set down the pad thai. Her hands were shaking and she needed them to stop. She was an archivist. She was trained to handle fragile things without breaking them. She could do this. How long? She said. Her voice was even. She was proud of how even it was. Lily, please let me. How long have you known that I look like her? The silence was unbearable. Before the bar, he said. The words landed like a blow. She felt them in her sternum. Before the bar, she repeated. Before the rescue. Before the note. Before the coffee you didn't drink, and the croissant you didn't eat, and the groceries, and the truth, and all of it. Before all of it. I saw you 3 weeks before that night, walking past a bookshop on East 10th. I had not thought of Marguerite in a very long time. And then you turned your head and, stop. He stopped. The rescue, she said. In the bar. That wasn't spontaneous. You were there because of me. Yes. You were there because I look like a dead woman. Initially, but everything you told me. Her voice was still even, still controlled, and underneath the control was something that was going to break, and she was not going to let it break in front of him. About being surprised, about me being the first real thing in a century. That was about her. You were surprised because for a second, for 1 second in that bar, you thought you were seeing her. That is not, tell me I'm wrong. He couldn't. She could see it in his face, in the ghost memory reflex at his jaw, the way the muscle worked against nothing because there was no heartbeat to drive it. He couldn't tell her she was wrong, because she wasn't. The feelings are real, he said, and his voice was stripped bare, all the composure gone, all the centuries of managed register dissolved. What I feel for you is... What you feel for me started because I have her face. Everything after that is built on a lie. She picked up her bag from the chair. I told you my conditions, the truth, all of it, before I have to figure it out myself. I know. You broke every one. I know. She walked past him. He didn't try to stop her. A predator who understood that the moment to be still was the moment you wanted most to move. She made it to the front door. She didn't look back at the portrait. Percival was in the hallway. His face was, for the first time since she'd met him, unreadable. Not delighted, not amused. Something that might have been sorrow, worn with the quiet competence of someone who had watched his king lose things before. Miss Lily, he said. Good night, Percival. She closed the door behind her. The night air was warm. She was shaking. Chapter 6. The Proof. 3 days passed. Lily went to work. She sorted correspondence from 1847. She catalogued a collection of daguerreotypes donated by an estate in Connecticut. She ate lunch at her desk and did not think about Ambrose Crane, except constantly, the way you don't think about a bruise except every time you move. On the 4th day, a note arrived at the library. Heavy cream paper, precise handwriting. You told me about the cuneiform tablet on our first morning. You said it was a receipt for livestock, and that it made you love history because it proved that people 4,000 years ago were just as boring and ordinary as we are. You said boring and ordinary like it was the highest compliment you could pay someone. I have been thinking about that for 3 weeks. Marguerite would not have said that. She would have said something about beauty or fate. You said boring and ordinary, and it was the most original thing I'd heard in 4 centuries. No signature. She didn't need one. She put the note in her desk drawer and went back to the daguerreotypes. The next day, another note. You sort your groceries cold items first, always. You put the milk away before you take your coat off. You do this because your mother once left a gallon of milk on the counter overnight when you were 7, and you have never forgiven her for the waste. You told me this while I was carrying your bags up the stairs, and you didn't notice that you were telling me, which is how I know it's true. Marguerite never carried groceries. She had servants. You carry your own groceries, and you have a system, and you are furious when anyone disrupts it. The day after, you failed out of art school. You told me this as though it were a confession. You said you couldn't make beautiful things, so you learned to take care of beautiful things other people had made, and you said it like that was a consolation prize. It wasn't. You are the person who makes sure 4,000-year-old receipts survive. That is not a consolation prize. That is the whole point. Marguerite painted. You preserve. You are not the same person. You have never been the same person. I knew this by the 2nd week, and I should have told you then, and I didn't, because I was afraid you would leave, and I was right to be afraid. Because you did leave, and you were right to leave. Lily sat at her desk for a long time after that one. Percival delivered the notes. She saw him once, leaving the building as she returned from lunch, his composure firmly in place, but something around his eyes that she could only describe as investment. He was not enjoying this the way he'd enjoyed the earlier phases. This was something else. This was a man who had watched his king be alone for a very long time, and was watching him fight, possibly for the first time, for something that could not be won with authority or patience or the sheer weight of centuries. On the 6th day, the note was shorter. You were right about the eggplant. It is technically a berry. I confirmed this. You were also right that I have meetings. I had one yesterday, and I thought about you during it, and Percival noticed and wrote "Focus" on a piece of paper and held it up behind Lord Beaumont's head. And Lord Beaumont has no idea, and I am telling you this because you said you wanted the truth. And the truth is that I am running a 700-year-old political institution, and I cannot concentrate because a woman with vegetable magnets told me I was a vampire mayor, and she was not entirely wrong. She laughed. Alone, at her desk, in the silent archive, she laughed, and then she pressed her hand over her mouth because the laugh had a crack in it. On the 7th day, a note arrived with something taped to it. A small, yellowed receipt, handwritten in Latin, dated 1343. A bill of sale for 3 goats. You told me history is mostly receipts. You were right. I found this one in a box I haven't opened in 400 years. I was there when it was written. The goats were terrible. I'm giving it to you because it belongs in an archive with someone who understands what it means, which is not that goats were sold in 1343, but that someone 400 years ago thought 3 goats were worth writing down, and 700 years later, a woman in a library would hold that paper and feel connected to a stranger she never met. That's what you do. That's what you are. Marguerite painted portraits of people she thought were beautiful. You preserve receipts for goats. I know which one matters more. She held the receipt with archivist's hands, the careful, instinctive handling of something fragile. And she thought about a man who had kept a receipt for 700 years in a box he never opened, and had given it to her because she would know what it meant. On the 8th day, the note was one line. I am at the cafe, the one with the code. I have ordered a coffee I will not drink. I will wait. He was at the corner table, the same table as their first morning. He was sitting very still, not the careful composure she'd gotten used to, but the absolute ancient stillness of a creature that does not breathe and does not move and is choosing, moment by moment, to stay. The coffee in front of him was steaming. The QR code menu card was still on the table. He hadn't scanned it. She sat down across from him. He looked at her. His face did something complicated, hope and restraint and the kind of careful, controlled not reaching that she now understood was what 700 years of loss taught you to do when the thing you wanted was close enough to touch. I read your notes, she said. I know. The one about the groceries was creepy. I know. The one about the eggplant was funny. Something shifted in his eyes, a flicker. I wasn't trying to be funny. I know. That's why it's funny. She looked at him across the small table, the same table where he'd examined a QR code like it was enemy intelligence, the same table where he'd ordered a croissant he would never eat and held a coffee for its warmth. I need to say something, and I need you to listen. I'm listening. If you ever look at me and see her, even once, I'm gone. No second chances, no notes, no cafe. Gone. I understand. I mean it. I know you mean it. You have never, in the time I have known you, said a single thing you didn't mean. It is one of the reasons. He stopped, recalibrated. It is noted. I'm not her. No. I'm not a second draft of her. No. And then, very quietly, with the weight of something that had been building for 700 years and had only recently found the right shape. You are the original of something. I just didn't know what it was until I met you. She looked at him for a long time. The cafe was quiet around them. The morning light came through the window, and he didn't flinch from it. They were in the shade of the awning, and he had chosen this table on purpose, and she understood now that he would always choose the table that let him sit in the light with her for as long as possible. Order me a latte, she said. He raised his hand for the waitress. His composure was back, or rather, a new version of it, one that had Lily in it, one that had room for vegetable magnets and grocery systems and pad thai and QR codes and all the ordinary, boring, magnificent details of a life that was nothing like the one he'd lived for 7 centuries. The waitress came. He ordered her latte and a coffee for himself that he would not drink. You're going to hold that for the warmth again, Lily said. It's a pleasant sensation. You could hold my hand instead. It's warmer. He looked at her. The centuries fell away for a moment. All the court training, all the managed composure, all the careful architecture of a king who had learned to want nothing, because wanting things made you vulnerable. What was left was a man in a cafe, looking at a woman who had just offered him her hand, and the expression on his face was the most unguarded thing she had ever seen. He reached across the table, his cold fingers folded around her warm ones. She felt the chill settle against her skin. 15 degrees, a wine cellar, a marble countertop, a January window. And she held on. I brought something, he said, and from his jacket he produced a yellowed scrap of paper, now carefully enclosed in an archival sleeve. Percival obtained the sleeve. He said you would want it preserved properly. His exact words were, "She will lose all respect for you if you hand her a 700-year-old document without acid-free protection." She took it, the goat receipt from 1343, in its proper sleeve. Handled correctly. Percival was right. Percival is always right. It is the most exhausting thing about him. He paused. He also asked me to tell you that he found the entire affair, his word, the most riveting development in court life since the Beaumont succession crisis of 1743. He wanted you to know. Tell him I'm glad someone's having a good time. He is having the best time. It is deeply undignified. But Ambrose was almost smiling. Not the composed, managed curve she'd seen before, but something smaller and realer and closer to the man underneath the king. The waitress brought their drinks. The QR code sat untouched between them. He picked up his coffee and held it, for the warmth, as always, but his other hand stayed in hers. His fingers were slowly, almost imperceptibly, getting warmer where they touched her skin. The faintest transfer of heat. 15 degrees becoming 16. 16 becoming something less like stone and more like a man. "You're warming up," she said. "It happens. Near you." He said it simply, as a fact, without understanding that it was the most romantic thing he had ever said. And Lily understood that he would never know, and that this was part of it, the earnestness, the gravity, the accidental devastation of a man who had been alive for 7 centuries and still didn't know he was funny or tender or worth sitting across from in a cafe with a QR code he would never scan. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. "Every tomorrow," he said, and he didn't know he was making a promise that would outlast her and everything she'd ever touched. But she did, and she didn't look away, because some things are worth holding even when you know what they cost. And the coffee was getting cold, and his hand was getting warm, and neither of them moved. Somewhere across the city, Percival was at his desk. If anyone had asked him how his morning was going, he would have said, uneventful. And he would have been lying, and he would have been smiling while he did it. Epilogue. The cafe hadn't changed. Same corner table, same window, same QR code menu card that neither of them had ever scanned, and neither of them ever would. Lily sat across from Ambrose and held a coffee she could not drink. She held it the way he'd always held his, both hands wrapped around the ceramic, absorbing the warmth. Except the warmth felt different now, sharper. She could feel the heat gradient, the exact point where the ceramic temperature met the air temperature, met her skin temperature, which was 15 degrees Celsius and would never change again. "You're holding it the way I hold mine," Ambrose said. "I'm not much of a coffee drinker," she said. "I just like the smell." He looked at her. The recognition landed, the echo of the thing he'd said at this same table on their first morning, and something in his face did the complicated thing it did when he was feeling too many things at once and didn't know which one to show. He settled on a smile. Small. Real. "That's my line," he said quietly. "It's mine now." Outside, the city moved in its ordinary way. People walked past who didn't know that the woman in the cafe had died 3 months ago and come back different, that the process had taken 4 days and been the worst thing she'd ever experienced, and the most deliberate choice she'd ever made. They didn't know that she'd signed papers, actual papers, because Ambrose's court had a legal framework for this now, and that Percival had personally drafted the consent documentation with what she could only describe as radiant professional satisfaction. They didn't know that she could hear the heartbeat of the waitress from across the room, or that the smell of the coffee was so vivid now it was almost unbearable, every note of it distinct, the roast and the water and the faint chemical trace of the cleaning solution on the mug. They didn't know that she hadn't slept in 11 weeks and that she didn't miss it. Her hand rested on the table beside his. Same temperature, same stillness. She missed the contrast sometimes. The cold of his hand against the warmth of hers had been the first thing she'd noticed about him, and the last thing she'd felt as a human. And now it was gone, replaced by a sameness that was its own kind of intimacy. 2 hands the same temperature. 2 hearts that beat once an hour or not at all. 2 people who would sit at this table long after everyone they knew had died, and who would argue about QR codes for centuries, because neither of them would ever admit the other was right. "Percival asked me to inform you," Ambrose said, "that your turning has been officially recorded in the court register, and that he has taken the liberty of updating your title in all formal correspondence." "My title?" "He has listed you as Lily, consort to the king, formerly of Ohio, archivist." He put "formerly of Ohio" in a court document? He felt it was relevant context. And archivist is part of my royal title now? Percival believes in comprehensive records. She laughed. The sound was different now. Clearer, with a resonance she was still getting used to, as though her voice had been tuned to a frequency she'd never heard before. But the laugh itself, the particular shape of it, the thing that made it hers, was exactly the same. I need to tell you something, she said. You may tell me anything. Yesterday, I was carrying boxes at the library. Margaret asked me to move a filing cabinet. A full filing cabinet. I picked it up in one hand. He went very still. She was watching. What did you tell her? Lily looked at him across the table. The same table where she'd first seen him examine a QR code like it was enemy surveillance. The same table where she'd first heard him order a coffee he'd never drink. The same table where she'd come back to him after the worst week of her life and taken his cold hand and told him she wasn't a second draft of anyone. I told her I work out, she said. Ambrose closed his eyes. The muscle at his jaw tightened once, the ghost memory of a reflex that hadn't had a pulse behind it in 700 years. When he opened his eyes, they were bright with something that might have been laughter and might have been love, and was probably both. That, he said, is a terrible excuse. It worked for you. It absolutely did not work for me. You laughed in my face. And what did Margaret do? She offered me a protein bar. He reached across the table and took her hand. Same temperature, same stillness. Two people who had chosen each other across an impossible divide, and then erased the divide entirely, which turned out to be its own kind of terrifying, and its own kind of magnificent, and its own kind of ordinary, which was, as Lily had always believed, the highest compliment you could pay anything. The coffee got cold. Neither of them drank it. Neither of them cared.